real people who have died because Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and successive Democratic governments have allowed the border to be open. Obviously, what Billie Eilish said was just stupid. So why are we stealing all their skilled people? If they were really skilled, don't you think India would keep them? How have you guys been so incredible at doing your job so well? I thank the minister for Wanga Wanga for her question, and I just have to say it's because we're the best people on earth. She's the best senator. James Patterson is a close second. Anne Ruston. Everyone needs to go and look up Anne Ruston. It's one of the greatest wins ever for the Conservative movement. It just goes to show that this was always, one, a demonic exercise, and two, an exercise in profiteering, mutilating the bodies of young girls. Joanna Howe, she's a saint. A baby whose name she picked, I believe, as baby Samuel, was aborted and left alive for 30 minutes to slowly die after a failed abortion. G'day. Welcome to episode 40 of the Mark Perrotta Show. In today's episode, we're going to get into Herzog, housing, and Billie Eilish. There's a lot to speak about. We'll get into a couple of other topics on the Mark Perrotta Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Blaster! Welcome to the Mark Perrotta Show.
Before we get into the main topics, we're going to take a look at a little legend. A young boy who swam 4 kilometers in order to save his mother and his sister who had been dragged out to sea after canoeing on a Western Australia beach. Watch.
The moment the Appleby family thought might never come, rescued after more than 8 hours stuck at sea, and it's thanks to the incredible effort of 13-year-old Austin.
I just said, all right, not today. I have to keep on going.
The family holidaying in WA's southwest, paddleboarding and kayaking at Quindalup Beach on Friday when conditions turned rough. Joanne Appleby, along with her 3 kids, swept out to sea.
We were cold, we were shaking, both side of the sea couldn't feel his legs, and it was pretty terrifying for a while.
With no sign of help on the way, Austin made the decision to leave his family, swimming 4 kilometres in rough conditions.
The waves are massive. I do breaststroke, I do freestyle, I do survival backstroke.
Unsure how his family was coping in the waves.
I had a lot of guilt in my heart. Because, I thought, oh man, I wasn't fast enough.
There's no bigger word to describe him other than proud. I'm speechless at his efforts, but at the same time, I knew he could do it.
Well, it's not too often that the Australian of the Year is selected within the first month of the year, but it's undoubted in my mind, uncontested in my mind, that he'll definitely be up for it. Swimming 4 kilometers is no mean feat. I once had to do a 400-meter swim as part of a triathlon. Sure, it was in fresh water, but it's grueling. It destroys your body, and as you can see, he's on crutches in order to walk today. This young man, more than likely, saved his family. And there's nothing else to say but sign him up for Australian of the Year. Let's move on to our main topics for today.
It's closer to its supply capacity than we previously thought, which means supply constraints are binding in some more sectors, and it's not taken much of a pickup in demand to generate price pressures. Years of weak to no productivity growth is a big part of that story.
I wouldn't want to be Jim Chalmers if I was currently the Treasurer. I'll put it to you that way. Now, he can claim that it has nothing to do with government spending, but where the government decides to spend its money is what determines how productive, how much supply, and where the cash rate is going to end up within the federal budget. It is entirely upon Jim Chalmers' shoulders. There is no one else to blame. There was an attempt within the Parliament, within question time, to try and throw the puck to Australians. Just everyday Aussies who were going out and holidaying. Some of the inflation, even by the RBA Commissioner, was placed upon the shoulders of Australians who decided to actually go out and enjoy themselves over the Christmas period, because that's not something that normally happens. It's not usual that over the school holiday period we would see families going and enjoying themselves and finding time to actually relax after what has been a grueling year. But this year it's different. This year it classes as a reason for inflation. Now that only happens in a weak economic situation. At the end of last year, we saw that the government blew its budget by approximately $50 billion. That isn't nothing. Outside of that, it isn't even close to meeting its supply caps when it comes to housing. Now that's where the real stickler is. Everyone knows that housing is the main reason that inflation is currently occurring. Because as housing supply is constrained, prices go up as a consequence. Now, what the RBA Commissioner said there, just that little tidbit, it doesn't take much extra demand in order for you to feel pressures on supply when supply is so thin. We didn't realize how bad things were. And so, the immigration policy does come into play. Now, I've heard plenty of people speak about the fact that it has nothing to do with the fact that immigrants are coming into the country at almost record rates. For a normal period, it is record rates. Now, you can take the post-COVID outlier and say that that was the record, but that's effectively what the Labor government has been doing since they started. They're taking COVID-era metrics and baselining themselves against an outlier, making themselves look better where they wish and making the last government look worse where they wish. In this situation, it doesn't really work. Because we have 20 or 30 years worth of immigration data that we can actually baseline off, the immigration numbers during COVID and after COVID can actually be seen for what they are, an outlier. 2 years of almost no immigration, backed by a high of approximately 550,000 people, and now stabilizing approximately 50 to 100,000 people above where we were prior to COVID. That is record highs. And so when you start to introduce people at that level, as we spoke about in the last episode, that require a drop dead ready situation. People who come here don't just get housed on the street. They don't just get placed into halfway homes. They instantly need homes for themselves, for their families. And as such, there is extreme housing constraint on the market today. Now, Jim Chalmers had this to say, and it was a fun little clip that was put together by a guy that I follow on TikTok. So watch.
Joins me now. So in the lead up to the election, you told voters the worst of the inflation challenge is well and truly behind us. Did you get that wrong?
No, David, it remains the case that inflation is much lower than...
You're arguing in that answer that this has got nothing to do with you. I mean, voters, remember, you take credit when inflation falls. You said when it was falling, it was proof of the government's responsible economic management. But now when it's going up, it's got nothing to do with you.
No, I've said repeatedly today, David, that I take responsibility for all aspects of my job. But more...
What are you going to do now? Because families are already facing higher back-to-school costs, higher energy bills, rents are higher, now the prospect of an interest rate rise next week for mortgage holders. What are you going to do now?
We don't write that budget in January, but... Well, I don't write the budget in January, as I said, David, the bin fire. Okay. Thanks, David.
There by Sync TV, and a pretty good bloke too. He runs lives on TikTok if anyone is interested. I suggest you go over and listen to them. They get a bit crazy sometimes, and some people come on and just want to have a spray, but most of the time they are pretty cool. Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. But in saying that in jest, I guess the real question is, what is the Albanese government's plan? What is the Albanese government going to do in order to open up housing supply, in order to unleash the beast that is required in order to catch up when it comes to housing? Well, he's got two plans. Number one, in South Australia, he's giving them almost $1.5 billion in order to backfill their inability to build homes. And in the rest of the country, he's selling off military land. Not kidding. That's his plan. Watch.
The Albanese government says that $3 billion defence sell-off it announced today is of Defence Forces buildings and land it doesn't actually need. Some of the buildings are empty, broken up. It's going to save money by selling them.
Shame on the Albanese government for the way they have destroyed the morale of our fighting men and women. And shame on the Albanese government for the news today that they are selling off our prime defence land and bases across our country. Labor is selling off historic bases like Victoria Barracks in Sydney and Melbourne, central to the ADF's identity and history. Labor is selling off important bases like Irwin Barracks in Perth, home to the 13th Brigade and the heart and soul of our Army Reserve in the West. Labor is selling off key bases like HMAS Penguin, which provide an important presence and capability in Sydney for the Royal Australian Navy. And Labor is selling off land near sensitive bases like Swan Island in Victoria, putting at risk important capabilities. The Albanese government are not stewards, they are wreckers, and they are wrecking our inheritance. They are pushing our fighting men and women and their families further away from the cities that we depend upon for the recruitment of our soldiers, sailors and airmen. Why? For money.
Now, this comes at a time where the Albanese government is currently also negotiating the purchase, and this is a good one. Okay, this is actually a very good decision by the Albanese government. They are looking to purchase back or acquire back Darwin Port. Now, the port in Darwin was sold off to a Chinese company, or let's call it leased, because it's technically what it was. It was leased for 99 years to a Chinese company. The port had been losing money. The issue is it's one of our busiest ports. Now, obviously, China ships a whole lot more than Australia does. And so they've turned it into a profitable port over the course of the last 5 years. Now, the Albanese government wants to take that back. China is threatening the Australian government and asking for approximately 2.5 times what the actual sale value was about 5 years ago. The Australian government said that if they don't reach reasonable terms, then they will take it by force, which is in fact a military action against a Chinese company. China is threatening Taiwan openly. And at the same time, Anthony Albanese's big decision is, let's sell off military bases. We don't need them. We're in a time of peace. Why would we need historical bases, land that is owned by the government, in order for us to be military ready? That's the thing about military readiness, and it's something that David Shoebridge always speaks about as well. The thing about military readiness is that you don't know that you need to be ready until the war begins. And so you kind of always have to be ready, especially when we are neighbours or close neighbours with some of the most hostile forces in the world. We're talking about China, of course, Japan, who, though an ally, has chosen in the past to side with the wrong side, if you know your history. And of course, North Korea, who, by every measure, likely have the nuclear capability to be able to hit Australia. And so selling off these bases doesn't seem to make sense to me, outside of the fact that the Albanese government is desperate. They don't see how, given their socialist and communist agendas, they can in any way, shape or form increase supply of housing in this country. Because when you hate business, going from small business to the largest businesses in the country, then the consequence is less builders in the market, which means less competition, which means prices go up, which means less houses are going to be built because less people can afford to build them. High taxation effectively means that people don't want to sell because if they sell now, they're going to get hit with a tax that is going to effectively make the last 5, 10, 15 years of their investment useless. And so they're sort of stuck in the middle. But what else? What other options do they have? Well, apparently they are seriously weighing up Larissa Waters, who is the leader of the Greens, proposal to remove the capital gains tax discount. Now, for those of you who don't know what the capital gains tax discount is, it is for someone who owns a stock or owns a property for 12 months. If you hold it for that period of time, then you are able to claim 50% of capital gains back as a discount. This is an incentive that was built in for people to invest in housing and house building rather than the government having to do it themselves, rather than developers having to pre-build the house and sell it off as a house and land package. They could sell off a land package and then investors could go in and spend their own capital through a loan, an investment loan, build up the house and then sell it off to first-home buyers, or hold it and use it for rentals. This opens up the market. What the capital gains tax discount does, it allows more people to say that is a fruitful investment for me to go and spend 12 months building a home, spend my money. It is a risk. You are taking out an investment loan to build a property. And in doing so, you get the reward of having less tax taken out as a consequence. Now, a report came out beginning of this week that effectively said that the government now spends more on capital gains tax discounts than it does on social housing and social housing associated programs. But it's kind of a fallacy because in theory, the government doesn't spend that money. All the government does is not earn that money. And because the government is not earning that approximately $15 to $16 billion extra from the capital gains tax discount each year, they class it as a cost. Which means, in essence, the Greens can sit there and pretend as though it is mostly, which to an extent it is. You know, the top 5-10% of investors in this country do tend to be big businesses. But that's where you should be hitting. Because removing that capital gains tax discount is going to stifle the market in a way that the market already cannot handle. If you model this out and you remove the capital gains tax incentive, what's going to happen is that housing supply is actually going to crunch by approximately 300,000 homes over the course of the next 5 years. Chances are prices might come down slightly, potentially in the 6 to 10% range over the course of the next 10 years. But that isn't even weighing in factors like increased migration over the course of that 10 years. And so while supply is coming down and investor pricing is coming down, at the same time, we are going to see more migrants coming into the country, increasing demand on a supply-choked market. The government has no good options right now. They cannot maintain a socialist agenda and simultaneously build homes. But there might be a savior in all of this. And of course, it would have to be an Australian business that comes out with the solution. And this is a little bit of jest, but it's something that is currently blowing up. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it, but I'll read it out and you can tell me if it's just a laugh or if it is actually a feasible solution. We'll read directly from the article. This is from Domain. Okay, so domain.com. Can Bunnings DIY flat pack fix the Australian housing crisis? Bunnings has effectively partnered with a local Victorian business to create a flat pack that is under $50,000. It's effectively a solitary confinement box, but it has everything you need to live. It has a bed, has a lounge room, has a sink, has a toilet. It's made purpose-built to have to avoid any sort of government regulation. As soaring house prices push the Australian dream out of reach, house hunters are considering alternatives to traditional brick and mortar. The national median house price ticked over $1 million and hit $1.2 million in December of 2025, curbing any hopes of housing affordability coming back into focus anytime soon. Yet, amid the doom and gloom, there is a glimmer of hope with tiny home alternatives. Bunnings has an offering at the affordable end, partnering with luxury tiny home creators Elsewhere Pods to sell DIY homes with a starting sticker price of approximately $42,900. The company's pods are designed to potentially require no building permit and take 2 days to install, with easy DIY installations. As usual, where a Labor government fails big business and Australian businesses will step up to fill the gap. And this is where the difference lies. In my mind, this is a two-way street. I agree to an extent with the Green senators who say that there are far too many large international corporations who have stock in housing in this country. There are far too many large corporations which hold land parcels waiting for the day that they can make the pretty penny that they've been holding on to for a very, very long time. Supply is not simply an issue of the government not taking the correct steps, but the legislation that surrounds these decisions cannot, as we saw with the bill that came out, which mostly affects average farmers and average gun holders, it cannot affect the everyday Australian citizen. It has to be a targeted approach. You do have to target the top 5 and 10%, and not in the way of taxing them more, but in the way of saying that we have to level out the playing field in order to ensure that whatever we lose from a large corporation's perspective as a direct result of our decision can be backfilled by the average Australian investor. Because there's no problem with having your average mum and dad say, hey, it would be great if we could have an investment property. In fact, that is a legacy builder. Your parents, their parents, and your kids all benefit from mum and dad deciding that they're going to go and buy an investment home. Because if something happens in the future, or if housing prices go even higher into the future, having that house as a backup for your kids is something that is important. It is something that is good for ensuring the safety and security of your own family. Not only that, it takes pressure off the public sector in order to actually build houses. It takes pressure off the housing market, developers, etc., from having to actually develop these houses themselves. Because if mum and dad can go and get an investment loan and build up a duplex or build up a vacant piece of land, then they can, in essence, curtail the housing crisis themselves. And that's the other thing that people fail to remember as well. A lot of people who purchase homes today are purchasing it under investment loans. That is to say that they live with mum and dad. They purchase a home under an investment loan because the rate is actually much easier to get. It is far easier to get a loan under that sort of structure. And so they live with mum and dad for a couple of years while they build back their savings after placing a deposit onto a home. And then from there, they can settle in when they're ready, when their finances are at the level that they need to be. And the last thing is this. We need to open up cities away from the centres. We're about to build the Bradfield Airport. The city is no longer the city. People live easily an hour away from the current city and the current CBD. A secondary CBD needs to be created, and it needs to be created as far away as humanly possible from the main city. The reasoning is this. You need to be near the CBD in order to attain the kind of job that is going to pay you enough to purchase a home. And as a consequence of that, being within an hour of the city is almost required. Now, Bradfield Airport, being approximately 45 to 50 minutes away from the current CBD, needs to be the new location because otherwise we are going to be chokeholded into the Sydney Basin. Property can stretch out as far as Lithgow, but right now it is not available for the average person to just live in Lithgow and then have a job in the city. You would be driving approximately 3 hours each way to get from Lithgow to the city every single day, with traffic, of course. Let's see what the Albanese government does. Let's see if Jim Chalmers can pull himself out of the depths. I really, really doubt it. Now let's quickly jump into Herzog and him coming to Australia and the vitriol that has come out from the Greens and the hypocrisy, as usual, that we see out of them and their camp. Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, is coming to Australia next week. Now, as you would expect, David Shoebridge took to the floor in order to ensure that this does not happen. Now, as it does happen in the Senate, he was effectively censured immediately and told that he was not allowed to give his actual case as a consequence of the Senate effectively saying they don't want to hear what he has to say. But as part of a loophole, he can effectively claim his case to say what he wants to say as a portion of his speech. So he used that loophole in order to give a big speech. And in that speech, he was only meant to hit on the points as to why it was important that they actually hear his statement. In that speech, he came out and said that all of the calls from the protests recently have all been peaceful, calling for peace. That's been the majority cry. But when you actually dig down into what most of the conversation was in these protests, only one of them really calls for peace, and it doesn't even call for peace. It just says free, free Palestine. 9 out of the 10 effectively incite, in their own way, or directly call for the destruction of Israel. In this speech, David Shoebridge gave his reasons as to why Isaac Herzog should not be allowed to come to Australia and why protesters should be allowed into the streets to protest him coming. Now, this is a consequence of the fact that the New South Wales Police Commissioner came out and stated that he's not going to let protests go ahead again. He's going to ban protests for another 2 weeks. It kind of feels like the COVID thing where it's only going to be 2 weeks. 2 weeks to stop the spread. 2 weeks to stop the spread. And it's just going to keep going and going and going and going. Now, this is actually against constitutional rights. You are not allowed as a government to stop protests outside of the fact that it is for public safety. Now, I'm not sure what public safety threat there is when most of the terrorists will be protesting. Obviously, that's satire. But in essence, what I have to say is this. What is the threat, really, to the people who are protesting Isaac Herzog coming to Australia? I don't see one. I don't remember the last time that Jews committed a terrorist attack. Now, obviously, the Greens sit here and say that their actions in Palestine are terroristic in their own nature. And David Shoebridge, in his speech, effectively did a guilty before being proven guilty. Watch.
To prevent genocide wherever it occurs.
Once again, I remind you to focus on why it is necessary to have the suspension motion.
Next week, this government is going to be providing the red carpet for a man who incited genocide. And the genocide isn't over. It's continuing today. During the so-called ceasefire, Israeli Defense Force attacks have killed over 500 people and injured more than 1,300 others, all while Isaac Herzog has been in power. I can't believe I have to say this. When someone is accused by the United Nations of inciting genocide, you don't invite them for tea. You don't give them a platform. You certainly don't welcome them as a guest of honour next week while suppressing the voices of those who object.
Now, I agree that you should not be silencing the voice of those who object. If there are people who don't want Isaac Herzog to be here, then they have the right to protest. Now, what you don't have the right to do, in my mind, is incite people to break the current law. At the end of the day, that is the law. The law right now is you cannot protest in certain areas of the CBD. And so for these big rich wigs who have come out and effectively said that go out, it's your right. You have every right to go and do this. Go. To me, that is a crime because you're inciting people who do not have the financial means in order to defend themselves in a court of law after the fact to actually go out and do this protest. You do have that sort of money in order to defend yourself. Now, when I said that the terrorists will be in the crowd, I do mean it as a joke, but when certain things like this happen, it also makes you wonder, are there terrorists in the crowd? The lawyer who defended effectively every big-name terrorist in Australia for the last 20 years has come out and said that he will represent anyone who was arrested because they protest Isaac Herzog for free. Let's run through the list of names that this person has represented. Amajan Azari, Khaled Sharif, Bilal Khazar, and Mans Monis. Now, Mans Monis might ring a bell. Mans Monis was the Lint Cafe siegist in Sydney. Two of the other people on this list were Australians who went to fight for ISIS, one of whom was on video holding the beheaded heads of apostates and their enemies. And so when the man who has effectively made a name for himself and a living, even as a criminal lawyer, which generally being a criminal lawyer doesn't really give you much money unless you are actually representing terrible people, it kind of makes you wonder, who are the people in the crowd? Is this just a publicity stunt for him to be able to get his name back on the books, considering the fact that he's currently going through his own court case at the moment where he's been accused of sexual assault by an intern? It just seems strange to me that these people have this agenda, that David Shoebridge can simultaneously call Israel genocidal when the exact phrasing of globalize the intifada and from the river to the sea comes directly from Hamas's charter. It seems very strange to me that he can pretend as though it's a problem to have tea with the democratically elected leader of another nation, but he will chant the slogans of a terrorist organization that has prospered in Western nations, and you only see it in the 5 best countries on earth. The 5 countries that created the modern world are the only nations on earth where you see this happen. Everywhere else on earth, it does not exist because people are realists. In Australia, in America, in Canada, in England, and in France, that's the only place on earth where we hate ourselves as a people so much that we allow this sort of conversation to happen, that it has become the norm because we are so prosperous that we are bored. Billie Eilish came out at the
illegal on stolen land. Like, we just need to keep fighting and speaking up and protesting, and our voices really do matter, and the people matter, and I say sorry.
Well, when you make statements like that from the pulpit of celebrity, it's no surprise that these people are so shocked by the reaction. They come out and say that they have a right to speak. They have a right to speak about politics. In fact, there are those who would come out and say that they should be speaking considering that they have a platform. But the thing that they never consider is this. They've lived their lives as celebrities. People who most of the normal world lacks. They became celebrities, for the most part, because people like what they do, how they sing, how they act, the content that they put out. It's generally because they are liked that they become celebrities. When you make yourself a political activist, when you speak from the pulpit of politics instead of the pulpit of celebrity, then you're going to get the reaction that most politicians get. There are very few loved politicians. There are very few celebrity politicians. After almost every election, within 2 months, the opinion polls of the average population just goes down. Because at the end of the day, when you're the up-and-comer, you're liked, you're loved, you're this revolutionary guard. But the second you're in power, then everything that goes wrong, it's on your shoulders. And so it's no surprise that these celebrities get lambasted the way they do. Because they're not just speaking about a movie anymore. It's not just a song. This is people's lives. There are real people who have died because Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and successive Democratic governments have allowed the border to be open, and illegal immigrants, who are called illegal immigrants for a reason because they ought not be in the country, have killed people as a consequence of the fact that they were allowed in. And so she's playing with people's lives in a way that she normally doesn't. Her songs do not inspire people to have the sort of hatred that they generally do for politicians. And of course, when you make statements like this, which effectively say that the illegal is now legal, there's going to be 50% of the country that decides that they don't like you. And then there's going to be a very small minority of people in the country who decide that they're going to do something about it. Now, Ben Leo has gone and done something. I do believe inspired by Drew Pavlo, who is our own Australian, version of... I don't even know who he sort of relates to, I'll be honest, Drew Pavlo. He's sort of his own unique egg, if I'm being very serious. But I do believe that Drew Pavlo's statement that he's going to go and, let's just say, protest against Billie Eilish, well, it led to what Ben Leo did. Watch.
Here because this is stolen land, Billy, and we think we should be given access to your quite lovely $3 million mansion. Hello, Ben Leo from The Late Show Live on GB News. Do you remember when Billie Eilish said this at the Grammys?
No one is illegal on stolen land. Nice is all I want to say, sorry.
Well, Billy reckons there's no such thing as an illegal human because we're all on stolen land. So we're here in Billie's quite posh neighbourhood in Los Angeles. Let's go and see if she practices what she preaches. Hopefully, if she sticks by her merits, she'll have no problem with me waltzing in, maybe making a cup of coffee or a tea. $3 million home. She's got some paddocks out the back with stables and horses. Maybe we can go for a horse ride. I'm sure she'd have no problem with it because she stood up on the stage at the Grammys, tens of thousands of people watching in the audience, millions around the world. The clip's gone viral. Here we go. Oh, nice little place. Bins are out. It's bin collection day. First of all, isn't that ironic? Massive gates keeping people out. I thought Billie didn't believe in borders. Well, according to the driveway, Billie does believe in borders. She believes in massive gates keeping people out.
Is it just me, or does everything sound nicer when it's British? Like, he is effectively going there to attack her for what she said. All the things that he said were effectively satirically mean, and somehow it still sounds polite. I don't know how that works. The British accent is, without a doubt, some sort of cheat code in life. But aside from the satire and the humour, there is actually a tribe, the local tribe of Los Angeles, the American Indian tribe, who still claims sovereignty over the land. It claims, much like our own Aboriginals do, that it was never ceded. And they're putting together a legal case to take Billie at her word and say, well, if you're going to say that on stage, then, well, okay, then we're going to come and take our land back. You said yourself it was stolen. That is, in effect, an admission of guilt. And so, why can't we have our land back? Now, I understand that the right wing of politics likes to do this. They like to satirize stuff. But they do actually need to be careful, because obviously what Billie Eilish said was just stupid. If there is a precedent created out of this, if the tribe is actually able to gain sovereignty over Billie Eilish's very expensive home in Los Angeles, that precedent will stick. That becomes part of law forever. And so they do need to be cautious about the way that they are approaching this and make sure that it stays in the realm of humour, and maybe a lesson learnt to the celebrity class that when they dip their toe into politics, they better have their facts straight. And for the most part, saying the politically correct thing means that you don't have your facts straight. We've seen that recently with the transition that has happened in the conversation here in Australia, specifically related to One Nation. Now, One Nation's surge has put everyone on edge. From One Nation themselves, who are flying off the ranks to try and get new people to come into their ranks. They are constantly pushing out messaging, trying to get new people, saying that they're looking for great candidates. They're on edge. The Liberals and the Nationals are on edge for very good reason. Their polling numbers are sinking through the floor. And Labor, well, Labor's on edge as well. So many pundits have come out and effectively said, oh, One Nation. You know, they're only taking from the Liberals and the Nationals. But every one of the recent polls has shown that Labor has dropped between 4 and 6%. And so that vote is going somewhere. To me, it seems that it'll likely go to independents for the most part. But independents don't always primary Labor. The preferential voting card will be very interesting in this next election. Because what's interesting is this. There are two factions of Australian politics right now. The very far left and the very far right. Now, the very far left has effectively got their way in Australia for the last 15 to 20 years. Since John Howard left, well, let's put it more when Tony Abbott left. When Tony Abbott left was really the end of the crucible of conservatism inside of Australia. So for the last 10 odd years, we've really suffered under the sledges of left-wing politics. The Morrison government was no better. Yeah, that was just shocking. And then now we've got Albanese, who is effectively a left-wing, far left-wing shill masquerading as a centre-left shill. But what's interesting is that those two opposite polarizing views of politics are the ones that are gaining traction. And it's not surprising considering the protests that we've seen over the course of the last 2 to 3 years. But it is problematic when it comes to preferences. Because the Greens do not like Labor. It's sort of that that biblical idea, right? Where no prophet is welcome in his own hometown. When someone says something a little bit edgy in their own hometown, the people who are there be like, whoa, none of that, thanks. When the Greens, who believe that they are doing something radical, they're doing something revolutionary, see the Labor Party having all of this power and all of this control, and they're the ones who are saying, no, we want to take it further. They don't like the Labor Party for that. And the right wing of politics is doing the same. We are seeing a transfer in speech and the way that politically correct speech has been happening in this country, and it's falling apart really quickly. Let's put it this way. Matt Canavan, who I have a lot of respect for, he's probably the leader of this. Now, for the longest time, you could just sort of pocket hole One Nation and just say they're a bunch of racists. But with Pauline Hanson getting more airtime than almost every politician at the moment, people are starting to realize that she's not racist at all. When people like Emeka, who I haven't spoken with for a while, actually, I might need to get onto that. People like Emeka actually come out, interview her and say, you're not racist at all. You clearly have no problem with my skin color. You might have a problem with me if my ideas are wrong. That's what Pauline Hanson has been saying for years. Sure, there have been times where what she says does not translate correctly because she tries to say it in the most revolutionary way possible. But at the end of the day, the message that she has been saying for 30 years has not changed. When you bring subsets of people into this country who do not align with our values, we are going to have problems. That's baseline. But the new argument has shifted. The new argument is when you bring people en masse into our country who physically cannot assimilate because they don't have spaces to go that are Australian, because we've pocket-holed them into these small, dense locations where the only people they interact with are people of their own culture, then you end up with this situation where, currently, we have something like 16% of our population which aren't citizens. They are not citizens of this country. 16% of 28 million are not currently citizens. That is a serious issue. That means that they really don't have a stake in this country. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a citizen in order to love the country. But it sure is telling when you have for so many permanent residents, so many temporary visa holders coming into the country, staying here for extended periods of time, and then we have to pretend as though that's not going to cause strain on the housing market and strain on the culture, strain on the way of life. And you can see it with how Matt Canavan has come out and changed the tune of how we are relating to Pauline Hanson. Because the way that Matt Canavan spoke about Pauline Hanson is effectively as a nobody who has no policies, who's all talk. The conversation on the left wing from the pundits' side has been even worse. From the pundits' side, they are effectively saying that Pauline Hanson is uneducated, that she has no authority within the government as a consequence of her lack of education, and that she is effectively someone who got lucky even though she's dumb. Now, this wasn't coming from just anyone. This was coming from the minister who created the immigration policy that we now live under. Abdul Rizvi came out and just pooped all over Pauline Hanson today on Twitter. His exact comment was, Pauline Hanson graduated school when she was 15 years old. She never finished high school. And that was somehow meant to be a smackdown on the fact that Pauline Hanson made a statement saying, I don't see the skill in any of these skilled migrants. Which is not wrong. I commented on the post, and my comment effectively was this, and it's something that I've thought about for quite a while. It's twofold. Number one is, these countries aren't exactly like, heaven. So why are we stealing all their skilled people? If they were really skilled, don't you think India would keep them? And two is, well, aren't these people like just the greatest human beings on earth for leaving their homelands that must be so plentiful, so full of incredible wealth and prosperity that they have skilled people to spare? Now, when you actually dig into the numbers in India, they've got an employment rate of like 17%, like an employability rate. The majority of the system that exists in India is effectively bartering. It's barter, it's trade, it's surviving on the bare minimum in order to get by. Now, they fudge the numbers a whole lot, and they try and say that they've only got a 5% poverty level, but 5% poverty level is less than $3 a day. That's the metric for poverty. And so there's a whole lot of people who are living in India in absolute squalor. But we have to pretend as though those people who set up that economic system, the houses that look like they were made in 2000 BC, sewage systems that are filled with dead humans who have been tossed into the river because there's no place to bury them, no clean drinking water, disease coming out the wazoo, death constantly, starvation constantly, that people from a country like that, who cannot fix their own home, somehow have the skills necessary to make our country go to the next level. And then this, let's call him a gentleman, this gentleman has the gall to come out and effectively crap on anyone who never finished high school, call them stupid, even though the majority of billionaires have effectively all come from that ilk, dropping out of school or dropping out of university. and then still has the temerity to say that we ought to give people from these third world nations who don't have really any educational prospects at all when you think about it, way to come into Australia. The PC language is falling apart because in essence what he's saying is anyone who votes for Pauline Hanson must be stupid because you correlate with her. And in doing so, he says that 30% of the Australian population is stupid. Do you understand how silly this is? It's entirely against the entire Labor Party platform, for one, because they're all saying the same thing. The entire Labor Party platform is shooting for the battlers, shooting for the poor. And yet the majority of their voters are the wealthiest people in Australia. The wealthiest and the most educated. That is to say, university degree educated, which is just a socialist education sandwich, where you get socialism to get in, and then by the end of it, you love socialism and you've got no idea what's in the middle of the bread. You don't know what you actually did with your degree. More and more, we're hearing employers say the more they see degrees, the less they want to employ someone. And so with this PC language suddenly falling apart around Pauline Hanson, she's ascendant in a way that is almost unstoppable. Senator Antic tonight came out and said some pretty good things about Pauline Hanson. She's a battler. She's someone who's been around for a long time. She's got her head screwed on. Words to that effect. He has not ruled out in any way, shape or form a move to One Nation. In fact, there are One Nation members who are now coming out posting about the fact that he ought to come across publicly, not in backroom chats, publicly saying, come out and do it. Enough on that one. Let's move on quickly. I've just got this one funny clip to show because Labor is falling apart. Effectively, I've watched every Question Time this week. It's hard. It is so hard to be proud of your country when you watch Question Time, especially with this Labor government involved. I don't think I heard a single question from the opposition actually answered. Every time someone asked a question, outside of the scripted ones that actually come from Labor ministers who ask questions of their own ministers that are clearly, this is how the questions go, right? The Labor minister will stand up and speak to the minister, the treasurer, and he'll ask a question about, how have you guys been so incredible at doing your job so well? Jim Chalmers will stand up and he'll come to the public. I thank the minister for Wanga for her question, and I just have to say it's because we're the best people on earth, and we're the most amazing humans that have ever existed. And so, of course, we do the most amazing work ever. That's what happens when a Labor minister asks a Labor minister a question. On the opposite side, let's just say, Ted O'Brien gets up, Shadow Treasury Minister gets up and asks a question. So why is it that we're expecting a $56 billion blowout in the budget this year? And Jim Chalmers will come up and he'll say, well, the minister who's got 6 purple ties on and 13 anklets and, he came to the office this morning in a suit that's made of nothing and he had to walk because he's so poor. Well, it's interesting coming from him that he'd come and talk rubbish about our government when their government can't even figure out who's in charge. That's Question Time. All of it. That's Question Time in 2 minutes. It's deplorable. It's very hard to enjoy it. But there are some fun things that come out. This wasn't in Question Time, but it's a fun bit of politics just to make you remember that there are still good people who do look into the detail and do answer the questions. And even though it's embarrassing, do to cop them on the chin when they need to.
In the Senate, you said, and I quote, the highest spending government was the Howard government. What is the basis for this claim?
If I've made an error, I'm happy to change that. I will get the figures that I was relying on.
Please resume your seat.
Thanks, President. Can I seek leave to table the mid-year and economic fiscal outlook from the Departments of Treasury and Finance, which have the historical Australian government data
Thank you,
on
Senator
spending?
Patterson.
Minister, in the most recent financial year, government spending was 26.2% of GDP. Can you name a single financial year in which the Howard government spent more?
Sorry, I've just been trying to get some advice. My comments yesterday, I do need to correct the record. My comments should have said the Morrison government, not the Howard government.
Minister, please resume your seat.
I would like to apologise to the Senate that I wasn't aware until Senator Patterson's question that I'd got the names of the former Prime Minister Howard and former Prime Minister Morrison wrong.
Minister, how, as the Minister for Finance, are you making such a fundamental error about Australian government statistics, which you publish, and why did you not correct the record earlier?
Thank you. Well, I've explained that I've got the names incorrect and I've corrected the record. And I would ask the same of Senator Patterson every time he goes out and does an interview.
Authorised by Senator James Patterson, Liberal Party, Melbourne.
Yes.
She still had to try to turn the tables. Come on. It's Katie Gallagher after all. Like, she's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed when we're actually speaking about intelligence. She's one of the better ones, to be fair to her, Katie Gallagher, but the very best, without a doubt. And everyone needs to go and look up this senator's name. She's the best senator in the Senate. James Patterson is a close second. He's very good as well. I actually really enjoy everything that he says effectively. He's spot on. His questions are amazing. But Anne Ruston, everyone needs to go and look up Anne Ruston. She is a weapon in the Senate. And I want to bring up good politicians because good politicians do not get enough credit in this country because we're too busy speaking about the ones who are just so bad, because that's most of them. But there are actually good ones. And Anne Ruston, to me, is just next level incredible. In the Senate today, she was just going at them non-stop. She sits on about 7 or 8 committees. She's everywhere. Every question she asks is spot on. So pause the video, go and look up Anne Ruston, go and look up her videos. If you ever have a chance to, and you know Anne Ruston is on a certain committee, and the committees are all live, you can all watch this. It's on YouTube on the Parliament website. So the Parliament YouTube page actually posts everything live. They don't leave it as a video live afterwards, so you do have to watch it live as it happens to actually see the faces and the reactions. But in today's one of the Labor ministers, it was insane. One of these Labor ministers came out and effectively said, "Oh, why are you asking questions of this person? She's trying to answer the question." And she wasn't. She's a Labor minister, of course. Cox is her last name. I don't know what her first name is. It's like a bastardization of a normal name. It's like Belindra or something like that. Belindra Cox. I think that's close enough. She came out and they were doing a question to the Senate Commission, which is effectively looking into the Labor government's plan to do at-home care instead of community care. And as part of this, they had, Meals on Wheels come in, and then they had the minister who's actually pushing this agenda and trying to get this across the line come through to answer questions to the Senate so they see where things are up to. And she would just not answer a question. The question was so specific, and Anne Ruston had to continuously correct. Like, I'm not asking that. I'm asking, can you give me the detail as to what is going to actually be the output from the 1st of July when this is meant to kick in? What is going to be the output that we are all looking for? Like, you've said that you're going to do this. Are we going to see this on the 1st of July? Yes or no, basically. She would not answer. She just kept filibustering around the question and never actually answering it. So she kept asking. And this Belindra Cox, who did not make an effort to actually get to the room, pipes up and says, Speaker, there's always a chair in the room. Chair, can you please, point of order, can you please stop Anne Ruston from continually, stopping the questioner or the answerer from actually coming out and saying what needs to be said, and just let her finish her sentence? And the chair said, well, no, she's actually doing the right thing. She's stopping her from filibustering. She's doing and then she interrupts her and says, no, that's not what she's doing. She's doing all this, that, and the other one. She literally in real time was the greatest hypocrite of all time. She said, please stop Anne Ruston from redirecting the question back to what needs to be answered with statements, which she wasn't doing. And then she made a statement that the chair, interrupting her, actually came, and Anne Ruston just sits there and like twiddles her thumbs. And it's like, you're just wasting time for everyone. And the way that these things work is that you don't get them for like 10 days at a time. You've got them for a very specific interview period. And if in that interview period you can just sit there and say nothing effectively and answer no questions, then you've done your job. You effectively evaded being transparent, which every single study has now shown that the Australian government currently under Anthony Albanese is the least transparent government in Australian history. And you get away with it. So Anne Ruston's doing her job, and this Labor minister, who did not make an effort to get there, was on a video, sat there and pretended as though she could be so hypocritical live and not get called out on it. It's insane. Go look up Anne Ruston. She is amazing. There's two more pieces of news that I want to get to right at the end of the show. The first one is go and look up the court case. Okay, I'm just going to give out the details. You guys can go look it up because otherwise this episode is going to be like 4 hours long. There was a court case that got won, okay, by a detransitioner who was affected by drugs, $2 million against the agency that actually transitioned her, the clinic that actually transitioned her. Double mastectomy, this poor girl, life is ruined. She effectively claimed, I was not old enough to make this decision. She won her case. It is the first real major legal win of a detransitioner in world history. The American Academy of Plastics, which is something like that, effectively came out the day after and said, we're no longer doing this ever anymore because, we're not going to make money because everyone's going to sue us and win now. It's one of the greatest wins ever for the conservative movement. It's something that has not been spoken about enough, in my opinion. And it just goes to show that this was always, one, a demonic exercise, and two, an exercise in profiteering, of mutilating the bodies of young girls, for the most part. Obviously, young boys have also been affected, but for the most part, this has affected young girls. Incredible win. The next piece of news is the Western Australia terrorist attack, which I can now call it that. The Western Australian terrorist attack has now been upgraded to a terrorist attack. It is a great piece of news. It's very good. It also broadens the window of what terror is. Terror for a very long time has been pocket-holed to Islam. And it still should be to an extent because they're the ones who do it best. They're like the OG. They're like the Apple iPhone of the terrorism world. And so they'll always be, the core center of what terrorism is. But at the end of the day, terrorism is the act of inspiring terror in a group of people. That's what this was. This guy tried to throw a bomb into the crowd. Now, he could be guilty or not guilty. That's yet to be decided. The court will do that. At the end of it, if he is found guilty, we will all celebrate. And hopefully he will get life in prison and not some soft, rubbish decision from a court that says he had a tough life and so he gets away with it. Awesome piece of news. The last piece of news that we'll get to today is Joanna Howe. Now, Joanna Howe, we've spoken about her on the show several times. She's a saint. She's a battler. She's constantly at war with the establishment of abortion. And she has just released new findings from Queensland, from hospitals out in Queensland, where a baby whose name she picked, I believe, as baby Samuel, was aborted and left alive for 30 minutes to slowly die after a failed abortion. Now, after this, she also released a handbook where they dictate children who are born. But it wasn't just children who are born. It's children who are born, but also what happened to them, how they were born, what was the instrument. All normal kids, right? Came in at 6 o'clock. They had the baby after 4 hours, drugs that were used, dilation times, etc. For all normal babies. And in the same book, they're labeling the birth through murder of abortions. Abortion listed under that precept. It failed. The abortion was a failed abortion. Then successful, obviously. And then you see on the right-hand column, which is like comments, reasons. And the reason why this abortion happened was just listed as social. It is terrifying to see the evidence that your eyes and ears have seen forever physically in front of you. Go and look up Joanna Howe's post at the moment. She's running a protest, if you are from Queensland. She's running a protest on Monday, I believe outside of Queensland Parliament House. So if you're a Queenslander, which I know at least one of you is, I would suggest you head out there. Take as many friends as you know are pro-life and go protest. Go show the Queensland government that this is not good enough, and hopefully it will show all of Australia and maybe the world. If we're the first Western nation to seriously ban abortion, it would be like the slave trade being banned in France for the first time ever in world history. It would be revolutionary for the end goals of humanity, which is the proliferation of peace, the proliferation of prosperity, and the reduction of suffering for humankind. That will do us for the show today and Wednesday. If you guys were keen-eyed, you would notice that halfway through this episode, entire background changed. And I actually filmed this over the course of 2 days because NBN, another public service, sucks. That's all I have to say. Spend money on public services and this is what you get. You get internet that drops out over the course of the last week 122 times. That will do us. I will speak to you all on Tuesday. Things from next week will be changing. Episodes will be coming out differently. And you'll be getting your news in shorter segments, but more consistently. I'm going to say it again. That'll do us for the show today. My name is Mark Perotta, and this is the Mark Perotta Show. God bless.